What is the most horrifying piece of information you have to share? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Carbon dioxide was blamed for the deaths of around 1,700 people in Cameroon, West Africa, in 1986 when a massive release of gas occurred from Lake Nyos, a volcanic crater lake. The clinical findings in 845 survivors seen at or admitted to hospital were compatible with exposure to an asphyxiant gas. They were just sleeping when the lake released a giant cloud of CO2 and wiped out almost an entire village. I work in the fire protection industry. We use a lot of different chemicals to extinguish fires in server rooms, high voltage switchboards, etc. Honestly, C02 exposure would not be a great way to go. But you would most likely be so disoriented that you wouldn't know what was happening to you. Story 2. For a lot of people, the first sign of cardiovascular disease is sudden death. My husband thought he'd pulled a muscle. It kept getting worse, so finally in May we went to urgent care. He was having a heart attack, but the tech doing the ECG was confused and went to get the doctor. The ECG machine was showing a heart attack. His blood pressure, though, was on the low end of normal. If they'd just taken his blood pressure, they'd have said he was fine and sent him home. Thankfully, when he said his chest hurt, he jumped to the front, and then when the doctor confirmed that the tech was reading it right, they put him in an ambulance over to the university hospital where the cardiac team is. Looking back, there were probably a couple of smaller ones over the past 2 years. They put in a stent, and he's doing well now. But if you're having what feels like muscle pain in your chest but haven't done anything that would cause it, please consider getting it checked. My husband is at a healthy weight, walks everywhere, has great blood pressure. But he still had a heart attack. Story 3. Sometimes when an elderly person falls and ends up with a broken hip, it's actually the hip breaking that causes the fall. I have a rare condition, musculoskeletal. One symptom is that my bones may as well be glass. I'm 35 and I fractured 20+ vertebrae on 4 different occasions. Cracked my pelvis in half and broke my hip walking across a street. It was in 19 pieces and so bad that I was put in a joint Army-Navy medical study because my injury was so close to what the military sees in vets who have stepped on IEDs and they wanted to try a new technique. I've broken each leg at least twice, untold arm breaks, scapula and humerus that I'm waiting on for reconstructive surgery. I'm gonna quit because that's roughly half, and I sound like a bee. And most of this has been in the past 10 years. It's degenerative, and my symptoms only became apparent in my mid-20s. Story 4. During the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, the flight data shows that the astronauts turned on their internal oxygen supplies after the explosion, so it's likely that some of them were still alive when they hit the water. But no one can say for sure whether they were conscious or if they were, how lucid they would have been because of the physical stressors acting on their bodies. I try to think of those training videos where they're filming pilot and astronaut candidates as they put them through increasing G-forces. It's at around 7 Gs that people start to pass out, and an instructor's voice will tell them to tense up their thigh muscles, and that seems to revive them somewhat. I like to believe that if the experienced people on board were aware enough to know what was happening, they would have allowed themselves to pass out. But that's purely wishful thinking by a non-expert. Story 5. During time working at Pearl Harbor National Memorial, I came across 2 horrifying tidbits. When the USS Oklahoma rolled over, it trapped sailors inside with no way of rescuing them. Cutting through the hull was impossible. A single gap would have caused the air pocket to collapse and flood the compartment. The workers still heard banging on the hull during Christmas, nearly 3 weeks after the attack, and plugged their ears with cotton to drown it out. The second tidbit is that by the time the workers got the ship upright and drained, workers were only collecting bits and pieces of remains. When caskets of the unknown sailors were exhumed to begin DNA identification, they discovered over 100 different strands of DNA from a single coffin. Story 6. Prions, aka a misfolded protein in the brain that causes other proteins to misfold. This literally causes sponge brain or large holes in the brain. It is always fatal, and there is no known cure or treatment to slow the progression. Prion disease can be contagious or genetic. The contagious form cannot be killed by extreme heat, meaning that people with prion disease who have to have surgery, those instruments used during surgery cannot be sterilized. The most prevalent contagious form of prion disease is bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also known as mad cow disease. Chronic wasting disease, CWD, is another common form of prion disease which mostly affects deer. While there are no human cases of CWD, it is theorized that the disease could be capable of infecting humans. Prion disease can also be sporadic, meaning the cause is not genetic or contagious, ultimately unknown. The most common form of prion disease, CJD, is mostly sporadic. Prion disease can lay dormant in the body for years, but once it is activated, the average prognosis is about 1 year. Story 7. On February 3, 1998, 20 people died when a cable car situated near the ski resort town of Cavallese, Italy plummeted to the ground from 260 feet. It was caused when a United States Marine Corps EA-6 Billions Prowler aircraft, which was flying excessively fast and too low during a low-altitude training mission, ultimately severed the cable that supported the cable car as it was descending from Mount Cermis. The disaster has been named the Strage del Cermis Massacre of Cermis in Italy. The pilot, Captain Richard J. Ashby, and his navigator, Captain Joseph Schweitzer, were ultimately deemed not guilty of involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide for their roles in the disaster. However, they were found guilty of obstruction of justice and conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman upon being found to have destroyed camcorder footage recorded from the plane's cockpit. Story 8. On November 25, 1988, a Japanese high school girl named Junko Furuta was threatened and brought to the house of a teenager who, along with his friends, proceeded to torture and the girl countless times for 44 days straight. In the end, Furuta was severely malnourished and was left in an incredibly weakened mental and physical state. On January 4, 1988, she was after being beaten up and having her face burned by the group of boys. Less than 24 hours after her death, her body was wrapped in a blanket, placed in a travel bag, put inside a metal drum which was filled with wet cement, and dumped in a construction site in Tokyo. Story 9. Gaze detection. The human brain seems to be able to sense if someone is staring at us, even if we do not see the person at all. This ability has probably protected us from predators. So, if you have sometimes felt that someone was staring at you, chances are someone really was. I think I was odd for not being able to do that when I was younger. But I learned that it was thanks to our peripheral vision. Up to a certain degree, we can sense them because we actually see them. I think I don't have it due to be myopic and glasses don't cover the sides. Story 10. I lost my leg to a bug bite that I had no knowledge of getting. One day my ankle swelled up, and I thought it was just me getting old. It got progressively worse. This was during COVID, so I didn't have a lot of options. After being up for a few days from pain and running a fever, I went to the emergency room and was diagnosed as having a sprained ankle. They gave me pain medication, which helped me sleep. I woke up after 18 hours to blisters under my ace bandage. I don't have any memory of anything until I woke up after my third surgery of them removing more and more of my leg. It was necrotizing fasciitis. I lost everything from a medical misdiagnosis. I am currently just about starving to death, as disability doesn't pay enough, even though I worked my whole life and did everything I was supposed to. Story 11. You are not immune to being brainwashed. People don't get sucked into cults because they are stupid. It could happen to you. Also, cults are not always religious, they just often are. Cults draw you in by making you feel smart and appreciated and loved. They douse you in affection and praise, and then they use your trust in them to isolate you from the voices of reason in your life. If someone is being super nice to you for a long time, making you feel special, and then they start telling you that you should cut off multiple people in your life, especially if it's the people telling you that something is wrong, that's a red flag. They will tell you that those people are unsupportive and that you don't need people like that in your life. This is a systematic way to cut off any resistance, so the only reasoning you will hear is their own. And all the while they will seem so kind and supportive. Do not get sucked into this trap. Story 12. L'Angolo di Gigi, the iconic Italian restaurant run by chef Gigi Ferruzzo, left an indelible mark on the culinary scene in the capital of Colombia in the 80s. Not only for its exquisite flavors, but also for the dark rumors that surrounded it. It was said that the gourmet dishes served there, located on the road to La Calera, were prepared with human flesh. Little is known about Ferruzzo because it's known that he was a butcher from a young age and emigrated from Italy to settle in Colombia. Over time, he began associating with influential politicians in the country, and his behavior changed so much that many compared him to a mobster. Rumors spread that these politicians were not only his friends, but also the ones supplying the bodies he allegedly used in his cooking. Because a supposed former member of the secret police claimed that the bodies from the wars against guerrillas and trafficking were sold to Ferruzzo, and that, on the day of the Palace of Justice siege, he was allowed to select the plumpest corpses. To this day, the whereabouts of these people are unknown, and that is why one of the theories is that he cooked them and fed them to his diners. The situation worsened when restaurant employees began to suspect something was wrong, as Ferruzo wouldn't allow anyone else to handle the meat because he claimed it was imported from Italy, sent by his sister, although she later denied this. Eventually, after these rumors circulated, L'Angolo di Gigi closed its doors, and Ferruzo disappeared over 40 years ago, leaving his fate shrouded in mystery. No one knows what happened to him. Story 13. The adoption industry, especially infant adoption, is actually human trafficking and sometimes genocide dressed up in a social justice trench coat. It's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry that quite literally profits off selling children. Just Google Georgia Tan or the 60 Scoop. Adoption has a long history of being used as a tool of genocide and colonization, especially for Native communities. It disconnects a person from their culture and community, which was what was done to me. Even foster care is highly questionable. It emerged around the same time that enslavement was ended and was utilized as a way for farmers to get free labor. Nowadays, states steal money from foster children, and roughly 90% of them will be abused within the system. Most children who are in foster care have some family who want them home. Neglect is often a code word for poverty. My own adoptive parents thought they were saving a baby, but my adoption never should have been legal, and according to the UN, it was an act of genocide. My adoption paperwork was edited because I was worth more money without my heritage I am white presenting. White infants can be worth up to $60,000. The prices are based on ability and race. Adoptees are overrepresented within all psychiatric settings, like inpatient and outpatient facilities, rehabs, the troubled teen industry, and psychiatric emergency rooms, which in the US generates even more money. We are 4 times more likely to attempt than the general public. We are also overrepresented within the prison system, again, generates more money in the US and among serial. Story 14. Considering how many wars there have been in just over a century, and the number of unstable and hostile nations in possession of nukes at the ready for just one of them to have a particularly bad day, the likelihood of mankind existing more than another 50 years looks exceedingly grim. That being said, there is way too much time wasted on grudges, arguments, and worrying about your calorie intake. Be kind and seek common ground and compassion for one another. Have that cheesecake. Stop doom scrolling and get out and ride motorcycles, go skydiving, or whatever sounds fun to you. Ignore all the hate and judgmental BS everywhere. Yesterday I was 25 and full of life. Now I'm 55 and full of regret for countless things. With my health, I may not see 60. I'm going to make the most of what I have left. Story 15. The Byford Dolphin Accident. November 5, 1983, which was pressurized to 9 atmospheres, when one of them accidentally opened the wrong valve, resulting in an explosive decompression of the chamber, all 4 of them and 1 other worker outside. The diver who opened the valve was sucked out of the chamber from a small gap along with all the air rushing out. Due to lack of better words, he was literally turned into pulp, and his remains were sprayed all over the deck outside. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.